Action. So welcome back to Show and Tell. Today I have my very first guest. I'm so excited. I want to say thank you to Danielle, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for joining us today. I'm going to be quiet right from the start and let her introduce herself. She's going to tell you a little bit about where she's from, a point of interest from her town or village or city. I don't know how large the population is where she lives. And then we're going to get into looking at some of the unbelievable garments that she has made. Okay, Danielle, take it away.
Thanks, Billy. So yes, I'm Danielle. On Instagram, I'm the Darning Darling because I do a lot of darning. Being in vintage means that you have to learn to mend and fix, and if you're already wearing vintage clothing, well, you know what, the seams are going to pop and you have to figure it out. But also because darning is so close to knitting, that I grew up kind of darning socks and fixing things, and that has kind of spurred on eventually getting into wearing and making a lot of what I wear that is vintage style. So I live in Aidrie, Alberta, which is in Canada. I don't know if you can tell from my accent. But the vintage community here is not very strong, but the knitting community is strong. And the ladies here do a lot of knitting for bird nests for the bird sanctuaries, and they knit preemie blankets for babies in NICU, and twiddle muffs for the elderly that are in the dementia wards. And, you know, just bits and bobs and a little bit of knit bombing, you know. So that is kind of the community locally that I'm involved in, and they think that what I do is great.
Since we're not traveling right now, because we're still kind of in lockdown, I think we will get back to the day when we will be able to travel and we might be able to come to your town. So would you tell us just one thing there that if we came, we shouldn't miss?
In the summer, Aidrie has a car show of vintage cars, and I think if you wanted to come, that would be a good time. They call it doing it on the grass. And because all the cars are on the grass, and yeah, it's a lovely afternoon.
Excellent. That's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, so tell us about the sweater that you're wearing, first of all.
Okay. This sweater, and I'll sit up a little bit. It is fully ribbed across. This one, I saw someone on Instagram post the sweater that they had just recently come across the pattern, and I was like, oh my goodness, I need it. And I'm in a group of ladies that we all kind of share vintage patterns, and I posted in there, does anybody have this? Because I couldn't find it on my quick search of Instagram. And yeah, someone had it, and I got it right away, looked through all my yarn, and I actually had this blue. It's a Schichenmeyer merino, and it's like a 4-ply, I believe. Very soft, and I pretty much went right that second that I found the yarn to completion. So it is a 40s style. This is all ribbed. We've got very boxy shoulders, which everything was very about the shoulder, bringing your eye up to that level. And I've got these gorgeous little, can you see them? Little people, folk dancers that I hand embroidered on it. And
when you say hand embroidered, is that duplicate stitch or it's something different?
I used a duplicate stitch. So it was meant to be an intarsia, but I did knit this on the machine. I have a standard bed studio machine that does the ribbing just beautifully. So but I tried it with the intarsia, and it was very picky, very finicky. And I thought, well, you know what? We're gonna think smarter here and duplicate stitch it, which was great.
Perfect. Love the hand touch.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorites. And then I added some little vintage buttons here on the side, because I collect and buy. I brought a jar
Oh,
So
wonderful.
do
Wow.
buy
Now
vintage chairs.
now I know where to go when I need buttons.
It's a great time.
Okay,
Yep.
I know that you have a few other things that you're going to share with us, so proceed.
Yes. So I have an item that Billy requested was this Deco dress that I've done. And I'm just going to try to stand up here for a minute to give you a good view of the dress. Well, here's the top of it. And it has a little gather here and the sleeve is open. It's too bad I'm not wearing this, but it's not completely finished. And the bottom, no, I've got it backwards. So the top has this gorgeous deco coloring of the 3 tiers and the motif. And then I've put that on the bottom as well.
Little Aztec motif.
Yeah. So this dress was a test knit, Fabel vintage, put it out as a test knit and I loved it. I had seen a vintage gal wearing the dress and I thought, well, I want to stab at that. So I messaged her and, sorry on my extra noise. I used Cascades 220 Superwash, which was close to the pickles that she had said. And this was the original top that I made for it. Her design on the top is kind of, it hangs like this and it's tied at the shoulder and further down. And I
love the colors. What made you choose those particular colors?
Oh, you know what? They were fairly close to what she had and I loved what she had. And so not very original, but I just love it. So when I completed the dress, being a test knit, I wasn't totally happy with everything that she had done, which is totally fine. That happens. And so I actually tracked down an original copy of the actual vintage dress and looked at what they did. So they had knit it all up in fingering weight. And this is a deep weight. Yeah. So I took a little bit of each pattern, the things that I liked, and then I've made this one again. And yeah, I had enough yarn. Can you believe it?
That's amazing. So you have 2.
Well, I have the top and it's more like, yeah, it's an extra small. And so I might end up doing the skirt for that and selling it, but I'm not sure. But I didn't want to take it apart because of some of the fancy construction she did on it. Instead of knitting it, for those that knit intarsia, you know, you can knit here and your yarn circles around and comes back. But she didn't do that. And no fault on the designer's part, she wanted something else, but every time you hit a color change, she had you clip the color. So I can't take it out. And it's lovely and I don't want to take it out. But that was one of the things I changed when I went into the second version was knit it in true intarsia, where your yarn is continuous. So you do end up with, like in this section here, you end up with the cream and the melon and the burgundy and then the melon and the cream, 5 balls that you're working off of, but.
That's okay.
Beautiful.
Do you use bobbins? Use bobbins?
Yep.
Now you mentioned that you might sell something. Do you typically sell your work? Because I think my viewers would want to know.
You know, I haven't sold anything, but I have sold because I do a lot of vintage sewing and then repairs, and I have sold some of that. So
you'll have to give me your website so I can put it in the down bar.
Okay. Yeah, that would be fun. But yes, so I just have to finish. I've just sewing up the sleeve on that one, just deciding how far I want it because it's more of a boat neck. And
it's fantastic, fantastic. I wish I had the figure to wear something like that.
Thank you. So let me share one of the very first ones I knit. Was this red jumper. Here, let me show you actually. Well, I often knit from actual vintage booklets. And here's the gal on the back. She's wearing this kind of Batwing sweater.
What year would you say this is from? Is this the 50s?
This is 50s. This one is probably 52, 54. Better not mark that down too closely because I'm just guessing, but it's definitely 50s.
Some of us were there.
Yeah. Okay. So I knit this one, and you can see that shoulder there. I liked the fact that it's all one construction. Well, it's 3-piece. You don't have to set in the sleeve or anything like that. Beautiful little conch shape shell pattern. And I've put on the vintage buttons to go with it.
Can you bring them closer to your screen so we get a real close-up of the buttons?
Sure.
Closer to your camera. Oh, yeah. Beveled. Wow. They're fabulous.
Yep. They're really great. And I really couldn't figure out any other kind of button to match the shells. Had nothing. And then these ones just seemed right. Just, you know how it goes. And let me think. This was probably the second one that I knit. It's a little 40s number. It has kind of a seed stitch motif in it. Coming down the shoulders, a seed stitch like this. Is that hard to see, Billy?
A little bit.
A little bit. This one I hand knit. It took about a month, and it's turning my screen totally blue. There we go. Around this time, by the end of this one, I had kind of developed an arm issue, and then I had switched to my machine knitting. I love, love, love hand knitting. If I could hand knit every second of every day for the rest of my life, I probably would. But, you know, your body just can't always keep up with what your brain and your motivation and that knit Joe want to do. So,
are you a continental or English?
I knit continental, and I think it's a wonderful style. Actually, after my injury, I started knitting Peruvian, where you have the yarn around the back of your neck.
Yes, I've heard of this.
But I tried a lot of different ways, but I couldn't really manage any of them. So I went, and I already had knitting machines, but nothing would have pushed me to use them the way I do now. If I hadn't had the injury, I would have just been happily knitting forever. But on my machine, I've learned to do some pretty cool things, like the intarsia on this one, all with bobbins. I think I had 25 bobbins on this lady. And yeah, hopefully in the future, maybe in a couple of years, I'll be well enough to knit again. But for now, we're making do.
It's hard to see the color. Is it black and white or is it some other shade?
This is a mint.
Ah.
Yeah, it's kind of toned down.
With black or something else?
It is black.
It's black, okay.
Yeah. This one's another 50s number, very diner gal. Needs a good pointy bra to really show her off.
I was thinking like the racetrack, the cars, the flag.
Yes. Yeah, checkers are so popular. And the styling on this one, most of my sweaters are short, so I thought about cutting it off, but it's got a little belted area.
Perfect.
Yeah, it works beautifully. So this one was a checkered, it's just called checkered jumper from a vintage pattern.
Okay, let me see if I have anything else I want to ask you. Yes, what, besides your injury, are there obstacles that are specific to vintage patterns? Like, are there things that you have found are particularly difficult when you're using vintage as opposed to contemporary?
Well, sometimes the vintage requires a lot of the knitter. It requires you to understand the styling already. I had patterns that very generally say, oh, go ahead and sew this thing in, and you have no idea what that term is. And I've had some great chances to reach out to other ladies in the vintage knitting community and say, have you ever heard of this? There's other things too, because I think my size works great for it. I'm, you know, a 32, 34 bust, but most of the patterns are written for a very small size range. You have to get very good at coming up with how to increase it and yeah, get it to fit on any body shape. They really often just put out the size in one size. So there's some great resources. I know Submersive Femme does her curvy month, and she puts out free curvy patterns. And then she also has a good resource on how to size up and size down in her things. But
oh, that's great information. I have seen that website, but I haven't perused it to that degree.
yeah, well, and I think you have to be unafraid to rip out and go back to it. This sweater originally was written for a 36 bust, which is too large. And when I ran the test knit, it was at least 1.5 inches oversized on each side, even having shrunk it down. So I manually, you know, wrote out my whole pattern and changed it so that it fits the way it does. But if you were to knit straight off the pattern, even at the tension it gave you, it would be completely different. So knitter beware, but it's so fun. I wouldn't let the obstacles like that. They're few and far between.
Since you have a machine, are you ever tempted to do like a dummy on the machine before you would hand knit, just to see, like, is this going to give me the right size?
Yep. I knitted this one. I knitted the back 3 times, and that sounds silly, but when you're doing it on the river, sorry, my children. When you're doing it on the river, it takes a couple hours to knit up the back. And yeah, I did my math wrong like twice, and so I ended up having to do it 3 times. So that is a very good bonus of having the machines.
I bet.
Now, some people do think that you kind of put in yarn on one end and out comes a sweater on the other. I think any knitter knows that that is never the case, but for any viewers there, you do have to still understand the basics of knitting, of shaping your pieces in and out, and all of that is hand done and manipulated.
That might tempt some people.
Oh, yes.
To switch over. I'm not tempted. I love that I can carry my knitting on the airplane, maybe again someday. Well, yeah. Okay, this has been just a pure delight, and I was a little nervous, I must confess, about having my first guest, but I think we pulled it off. So hopefully there'll be many more fantastic vintage knitters like Danielle to come, and I think we could just say goodbye, and I'll stop recording. And
thanks, Billy.
Thank you for joining me today.